Hi, I'm Lisa Singer, and I am the event editorial manager at Media Post. And this is Insider Summit BTS, where we get to pull back the curtain on some of the most influential women marketers today. And with me is Gayitri Budhraja, and she is the Vice President of Brand at e.l.f. Beauty. Welcome, Gayatri.
Thank you, Lisa. It's really great to be here.
Oh, it's so good to have you, and I'm so happy. And it's funny, like I found e.l.f. accidentally at West Side Mall in Los Angeles, and there was an e.l.f. store at the time. And I walked in, and I'm like, everything was like so inexpensive and whatever. And I'm just grabbing it all up. And I still to this day use your foundation, the concealer. I have the primer. So it's like I'm a definite fan. so, so
I
uh,
love that. Everyone has their own origin story with e.l.f. So it's always I always enjoy hearing those.
Yeah, and it's just like because I'm someone who tries other things and more expensive things or whatever, and it's just like I keep going back. The foundation really, I love that just you don't see that it's foundation. It just really, and I have very oily skin, so it just mats it out. Anyway, we're not doing a commercial for you guys, but I just wanted to throw that out there. And you guys, I mean, especially in terms of your marketing on that side, okay, this is going to be more flattery, but the Shorty Awards, with the winner of the best innovation or best brand presence on TikTok. You were nominated for best innovation on TikTok. So you guys are really killing it when it comes to that. And I just think that I love actually what your CMO said, and this is the last thing I'm going to read, and then we'll get into talking. But she described it as e.l.f. was born to disrupt and has a built-in renegade badass spirit in our veins. So I think that's awesome. So really what I want to put to you is what is disrupt? What does that mean to you? And not just in terms of what you guys do as marketers, but just it's more than just doing something different. And so talk about that.
Yeah, and I will say Corey is 1 billion% right. e.l.f. was absolutely born to disrupt, and our mission is just to continue to fuel that every single day. But when I think about just as a marketer, what disruption, what innovation means to me, I think there's first this piece of conquering new frontiers, doing things that have never been done before. I think the other piece that's just so inherent within the way that we approach marketing is just thinking way bigger than who we are. So this idea of transcending beauty and throwing ourselves into orbits that never existed before or that we had never been in before as a way to bring more eyes on the brand. So I think it really is just giving yourself the freedom to think outside of what the traditional bounds are as you're exciting the consumer base. And one thing I'll share, I was just actually in a meeting with one of our external partners yesterday, and the meeting was it was almost so dizzying because it was so generative in terms of what we were talking about. And I think a lot of what comes through in these discussions and how we come up with these ideas is it's really about how do we continue to expand the ecosystems that we're in? How do we continue to get ourselves into new and different orbits? But I would say the common thread for us is always coming up with ideas that are still absolutely rooted in insight and still so tied to who we are as a brand. And I think for us, that's really the magic that just continues to breed more and more innovation as we fuel this brand.
Yeah, and I think, and as a smaller, when you're starting out, and not necessarily small. I mean, obviously, e.l.f. is definitely known, but there are more legacy brands out there, and
Mhm.
your market also is a little younger. The demo. But do you feel like that gives you a freedom almost to kind of do what you want, so sort of take those risks more so than maybe if you had been more of a legacy brand?
I would say it's interesting because e.l.f. is over 17 years old. And so I think some people assume that we just kind of sprung on the scene but we are over a decade and a half old. And I think part of the ability you're right. I think there's a part where we are very entrenched with the younger demographic, but I think the other part that's very enabling is just what we stand for as a brand. And I think e.l.f. is really about unbridled self-expression. And we do operate really without any handcuffs. And I think we have such a freedom to express, but I think that freedom to express is so rooted in who we are as a brand that allows us to jump into areas and really go into activations that I think others might be looking at and sort of not expecting for a beauty brand.
Wow, and that's funny because I didn't know that you guys had been around that long. You seem like such a young up, like not up and but yeah, but just because you guys do so many things that are new and young and fresh, and so you just kind of
Totally.
do it that way. So that's a good quality to have. So all right, well, now
Yeah, no, we say
But
I know we always talk about how we're a 16-year-old startup. So it's, we have that mentality and the agility of a startup, while we continue to progress Elf forward. So it is very, I would say the culture that we built inside the organization is just incredibly exciting in that way.
yeah, no, it's great. And well, I want to now sort of go back about when you started out, not at e.l.f. and started out in general. And
Mhm.
I noticed that you had an economics degree and dual marketing and management. And, so, you were kind of a slacker, like, so you really weren't this overachiever, were you? So, I mean, you were really, but it seemed like you had so many, options kind of what you were looking for. What was that initial as you're starting out? What were you looking for? And talk about how that's kind of evolved to where you are today.
Yeah. I would say that, when I think about just the various jobs and positions that I've been in, I think one thing that I am always seeking is to go into categories where that consumer passion exists. So out of undergrad, I was at American Express. I then moved to Clorox out of business school, and then I actually joined e.l.f., post Clorox, and I've been there for, the last 7 years. But one of the common threads, I would say across all those companies is being in areas and sort of seeking out brands where that consumer passion exists. One of probably the more surprising things is when I was at Clorox, I remember I was running the brand team for Glad trash bags, and you would just not believe that there would be any consumer passion around that category, but there actually is. And
Really?
so, it's obviously to different degrees, but I think one of the things that has been very important to me is find those brands where that consumer passion is there. As I've sort of evolved in my career, I would say the other piece that I have layered onto that is really seeking out companies where there is incredible leadership strength. And that's really sort of the story behind how I got to e.l.f. So our CEO, Trang Amin, he used to be the GM of the division that I was in at Clorox. So this is, many, many years ago. And I was following sort of his career when he had left Clorox and when he ended up being installed as the CEO at e.l.f. I knew that this was a jump that I wanted to make because he has such a strong track record as a leader. And I think one of the things about him that I just admire and I've learned so much from is this idea of really honing in on individual strengths and figuring out how to match those strengths to what it is that the company needs in that moment to be able to accelerate that person individually, but then also accelerate the ambition of the company. And so, when I think about sort of my own evolution as I thought out career opportunities, I think it started with that brand passion and sort of seeking out brands where that consumer passion is there. And I think the evolution has really been more of an emphasis on the leadership inside the organizations, because that really has influenced a lot of the twists and turns within my journey at e.l.f. as well.
Well, I'm curious because you talk about, working under him, and then that was why you wanted to make that jump to e.l.f. What was it, if you remember, that he saw in you that he wanted to hone to then bring you forward? Or was there anything that was sort of that guiding force for you, and what connected you guys?
I think it's, at the time, and this was back in 2014, this was around the time that the founders had exited. And I think the real focus was how do we take just the richness of what the founders have started within e.l.f., because we all believed in that core proposition, and how do we explode the visibility and how do we scale this? And we ended up doing that, for the first several years, it was really the combination of innovation and using the strength of our innovation to accelerate the retailer, our retailer footprint. I think in terms of, what I think Turing's on me, when I think about my own superpowers, and this is a word that I would say has really come from e.l.f. We talk about superpowers of our brands. We also talk about superpowers of individuals. And for me, sort of leading with a strategic mindset, I would say is one of them. And so, there's this piece of, as we are mapping out the next chapter for e.l.f. and figuring out where do we want to lay down the fundamentals so we can continue to accelerate growth, the idea of sort of leaning into that strategic mindset, I think is one of the things that he saw, and sort of an alignment between what the company needed and what I was able to bring at the time.
Yeah, and were there any in that process of where, with Clorox and then going to e.l.f., or even from the beginning, anything that really surprised you? I love that you sort of took control of where you wanted to be. And I think that is so telling of who you are as a, not only a person, but as, in terms of a marketer. But what surprised you maybe that maybe you made that sort of decision that wasn't something you would have thought you would have done a few years earlier?
I think the surprise was when I think about what I've done in the last 7 years at e.l.f., it has not been a linear path at all. So I actually, I first came into marketing, and then within 10 months of being within marketing, I actually switched over into sales, and I was in sales for 3 years. And then in 2018, I came back into brand. And part of really what navigated all of those twists and turns, one is what I had highlighted about Turing, which is what does the company need and how do we match strengths to what the company needs sort of in that moment. And then I think there's also this piece of just being willing to say yes. And I think, I would say that I myself didn't necessarily spot all of those opportunities within the company to be able to move around. So a lot of that came from the leaders that I was working with. And I think that's, where I feel like I have been very fortunate to have strong advocates and sort of leaders in my corner who are able to see that alignment between, individual strength and sort of opportunities within the company. But I think the role that I then was able to play in those moments was just to say yes. And really just to conquer any sort of hesitation that I may have had in my mind around, can I really do this? Because when I think about the twists and turns, I shifted into sales. I had no experience in sales. My entire background is in marketing. But I go into sales and we're trying to build our international business, from the ground up. There was an opportunity that then came up to lead our Walmart business, which is our #1 customer at e.l.f. And that really gives you, direct insight, and you're hearing things from the horse's mouth as you're working directly with the buyers. This is all experience then that I was able to take as I came back to lead the brand in 2018 and drive that brand transformation. So I think the surprising thing for me is my path at e.l.f. has not been linear at all. But I think the part that has been the enabler behind that is really just the willingness to say yes. I would say I did not spot all those opportunities, but those opportunities were put in front of me. And I think my role in that moment was just say yes and sort of conquer any hesitation around, do I have the experience to be able to do this?
Yeah, and it's so key in terms of, you said you were open to these opportunities that you might not have saw for yourself, but now it makes you a better brand leader moving forward, because as you said, you learned
Absolutely. Yeah.
in those other positions. So talk about that as a leader now. How do you look for those same, do you try to sort of bring what you got from all of these wonderful leadership opportunities that people gave you? Do you try to then sort of pay it forward with the people that are working with you? And what do you look for?
I think for me, as I build teams, this idea of really honing in on superpowers is something that I absolutely lead with. And it is figuring out what are the individual strengths of the people that are within my team and how do we absolutely leverage that to the fullest. I think the other part of it is wanting, creating these compositions within our team where we are highly complementary. And, when I think about it, if I use myself as an example, I did not come e.l.f. was the first beauty company that I'd ever worked for. Previously I was at Clorox and prior to that, I was in financial services at American Express. And so when I think about what I'm able to bring into the organization versus what are the holes that need to be filled through other individuals within my team, that's something that I'm also very centered on to make sure that as a collective unit, we're able to, we have the right dialing and sort of the right composition to be able to accelerate forward. So that's something that absolutely, I think about even the transformation from a marketing side and what this team looked like 3 years ago versus where we are today. And it is dramatically different. But I think the way that we've built the team, the way that I've also built the brand team is about identifying where is that domain expertise that I don't have and how do we get that inside the organization to be able to accelerate our overall ambition.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, that's any good leader knows to bring in the people that will make him or her look better.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're right on that part of what your thinking is. I always like to ask sort of, it came up a lot during the summits because of this past year in COVID and sort of that silver lining, trying to find that silver lining. But I kind of like to ask it here as well, not just from this past year, but just has there been a silver lining in your career that maybe something really what you thought at the time was horrible or the worst thing that could happen happened, yet it really, when you look back on it, it was probably one of the best things. Do you have anything that might have happened?
What comes to mind for me is actually 2018. And I think what happened in 2018 is this was the first down year for e.l.f. So e.l.f., we were coming off of so many successive years of just incredible growth. And then 2018 was the only down year within the company history. And so that was a clear challenge, that we were facing. I think the silver lining within all of that is we were able to use that moment to take a step back and really figure out, what do we have to evolve or pivot on as it relates to our business model to be able to accelerate this brand. And I think what we recognized is we were really leaning very heavily on that combination of our strength of innovation and using that to expand our retailer footprint. We intentionally were not that invested in the brand. We were focused more on our consumers and the evangelists behind e.l.f. and using them as a way to lift up the brand. And I think what we saw is, starting probably in 2015, beauty was becoming super saturated. There were a ton of indie-led, founder-led brands. Those trends, I think, caught up to us in 2018. And so we really then took a moment to pause to say, we need to start leaning into the brand in a much more proactive way. And so 2019, we talk about 2019 as I would say the transformative year within e.l.f. We literally woke the e.l.f. up. And I think the work that we did was to lay down the fundamentals of the brand, dive into the soul of the brand, and unleash a fresh perspective and figure out, what is that addictive emotional charge that we know our core consumers love, but how do we now put a megaphone behind that to bring more eyes on the brand? And so, what I love about that sort of challenge, clearly having turned into, incredible momentum, is that gave us a moment to sort of pause. And I think that had to happen for us to then figure out, where do we need to pivot? Where do we need to actually carve out the time and space to lay down strategy before we can then reaccelerate? And honestly, the rest is history, because the last couple of years within e.l.f., every facet of the business and our organization is on fire. And I think a lot of that has to do with taking the time that we did at the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, to set us up for sort of the next path of success for the brand and the company.
And it sort of makes sense. It goes back to what I was saying earlier, that you guys sort of seem like this fresh new company because of but it almost sounds like you became that when it was time to, as you said, pivot and figure out where we go from here.
Totally.
So, and I love that. Well, I only recently found, like I said, I've known about you guys, and so I didn't know it was that old. But like I said, I started using you when I was first in LA. So we're talking over 8 years ago. So and I've been using it since then. So, but I never knew it was eyes, lips, face. It was until, of course, TikTok and the campaign. And I'm sure it was coming out in other ways, but I mean, you guys went, the #1 brand campaign, did amazing stuff with movers and shakers, I believe, with the TikTok campaign there. And you really reached your audience. And it was, let me read this, the fastest campaign to ever hit 1 billion views in just 6 days. So that was pretty amazing. And you guys work with influencers really well. So I want to really kind of ask you about that in terms of, for your own influencers. I mean, you mentioned some of your bosses that really, I'm sure, influence your career, but is there anyone else that really influences you or influenced you, business or as a person?
I'll start personally first, and then I can talk about work. When I think about my own personal life, my family just overall is just an incredibly positive influence on me. I have a twin sister and an older brother, very close to my parents. But if I were to sort of hone in on that, I would sort of elevate my dad as somebody who has been incredibly influential for me. He's somebody, and for me, I just look at his way of being and the way that he leads his life. And it's interesting because I think with the work that we all do, everyone talks about balance as being something that is so elusive. And he's someone that over all of these years, he was an executive at a company for many years. He ended up starting his own company 20 years ago. He continues to lead that in his 70s. And when I look at him, he's someone who has just always poured so much into his family. He likes his work, and he is mentally and physically active, and he just leads a life of gratitude. And I look at those ingredients, and that has just been, for me, I just feel very grateful to have that as a source of inspiration to draw from, because it's so front and center and something that I've just seen with incredible consistency from him. But it's also something that I continue to aspire towards. So he's somebody who's been very influential in my personal life. When I think about professionally, there's so many people, both inside and outside of e.l.f. But if I were to talk about two people in particular, One is Suzanne Sengelman. So she's somebody, I jokingly call her my fairy job mother because she was the one that she led the division that I was in at Clorox. And so I worked with her for a number of years. And I think the dimensions of her that I absolutely admire, it's her authenticity, it's her realness. She's somebody who leads with those two pieces with incredible consistency. And so that's something that I always learn from. The other person, which is sort of what's happening every single day, is Corey Marchesotto, who's the CMO at e.l.f. And she joined the company in 2019. So our paths have been so intertwined over the last couple of years. And every time I look at her, I think the words that come to mind are boldness, conviction, and courage. And those are things that I learn from her every single day. So she's also been hugely sort of influential in the last couple of years.
Wow. And it sounds like a lot of the things that were about what your dad had, it seems like a lot of that crosses over into what the personality traits or your business influencers are like. It seems to be very similar
For
in
sure.
terms of what you were looking for. So that's really, I have to say, just to jump on, I am a twin too. I have a twin brother.
Are you?
Yes. I was like,
Oh, you do? Okay.
You can see.
Yeah.
I'm at my parents. So I'm visiting them in Massachusetts.
Oh my gosh.
Those two little things.
Yeah. Those are silhouettes.
It's
yeah.
like the little silhouette things.
I love that.
I'm like, oh, that's very cool. Were you the first or second? First out or second?
I'm 10 minutes older. Yeah. So I'm the first, and then
2 minutes older.
2 minutes older. Okay. And we look nothing alike. She's 5 inches shorter than I am. Our personalities are dramatically different, but our lives have been so intertwined. We actually went to undergrad together. We went to business school together. So we're very close.
That's awesome. So she's your best friend. That you've known truly the longest, even longer than your parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's great. So, well, anyway, I wanted to sort of talk about a little bit, this past year, I sort of touched on it, with COVID, but there's also been so much just going on in terms of, I think it's actually been leading to a lot of good things, that we're trying to be more inclusive. People are more, they're not just wanting things, they're really expecting it. Consumers, in terms of their brands, of advertisers. Talk about that a little bit in terms of, is there responsibility as a marketer to kind of show, so many different people, show that, be inclusive, or is the real marketer's, responsibility to, the bottom line, so how do you juggle that kind of thinking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for e.l.f. has always just been such a purpose-driven company. And it was funny because you mentioned you never knew that e.l.f. stood for eyes, lips, face. And there was sort of a funny moment when we were going through the brand recharge, because we realized that most people had no idea that e.l.f. stood for eyes, lips, face. And I think one of the things that we did coming off of the brand recharge was really be declarative of what our purpose-driven mission is, which is we stand with every eye, lip, face, and paw. And I think for e.l.f. in particular, we truly believe that we are a brand that is by the people, of the people, for the people. And we absolutely want everyone to be able to see themselves in our brand. And so when I think about the evolution in terms of what's happened over the last sort of several years, I think for brands, it used to be that, you would rely on a couple of shoots a year, and those shoots would sort of define the brand expression. And that's how you would show up in market and how consumers would receive you. And I think where we are today, the real job of brands is to really inspire that super fandom. And it's to continue to build those passionate communities and then lean in those areas as a critical way to drive that brand expression. And that's a lot of what we do. When I think of, what we've done on TikTok, and we were the early adopters on TikTok. And I think so much of it, and I think a lot of our early success on TikTok was recognizing that we just want to support this unbridled self-expression. And there's no prescriptive way in terms of how to live your life, or even how to sort of think of beauty. And I think that's the philosophy that we've always adopted. And so when I think about where we are today, for us, the ultimate mission is, how do we continue to lean into our super fans? How do we continue to lean into the community that we've created and use them to really define and drive and fuel the expression of the brand? So it's been, that's the journey that we've been on, and that's something that we continue to be committed to. But I absolutely agree. I think it is an imperative for brands to sort of really think about this, and figure out how to make sure that every consumer that they're trying to reach sees themselves, within the brand set that we're building.
Yeah, and I think, and you, I will ask you this actually, if what do you think? Because in terms of, do you think because of so much digital now, and because of social media, and as you said, we're seeing more campaigns come up and crop up from, and we're seeing user generated campaigns and kind of things. Do you think that that will help this mentality continue to move forward, instead of it just being kind of one of those, let's do something better, and then maybe goes on the wayside a year later? Like, do you think because of what the market is like right now, the world is so open up because of, social media and what we're seeing digitally, that now it's going to be, it's kind of just a given. It's going to stick. It's going to stay with us.
I think so, but I do think it's also, it rests on the shoulders of brands to keep their ear to the ground and to listen to what their consumers are doing and what their communities are up to. Because it's, I think what we've seen, and a lot of it has been accelerated through explosive, social media platforms. But that's only, from a brand perspective, you have to watch that and listen to that, and then know how to activate that. To really make sure that this is something that does sustain itself. So I would say that it's sitting right in front of us, but it really is the job of brands to make sure that they're listening. And if you're listening, you're able to take what you're hearing from your consumers, you're able to take what they're doing, you're able to even pull them into the campaigns that you're launching, and use that as a way to continue to fuel your brand expression.
Yeah, it makes sense. Because I mean, really, that's where marketers have that platform, brands have that platform. So it's just about using it. I'm curious,
Mm-hmm.
has there been a campaign in the past that you are like, this was the best campaign, love to see, love seeing it, was just thought it was so smart or so funny, or, fill in the blank?
Yeah, it's interesting because my mind actually first leaps to what we've done at e.l.f. And I know it's just because, and I know I'm in it, but when I take a step back, I can't believe what we've been able to accomplish. And I think we've really honed our ability to transcend beauty. And, for us, I think when I think about the evolution for e.l.f., it's, we started with this incredible proposition that the founders handed to us. We then took that proposition and just recharged it. And so those were the tweaks that we made, and then we put the megaphone behind it. And, that was 2018 and 2019. When I think about the last couple of years, I think e.l.f. has really been able to own its space within culture. And now and that's something that is absolutely earned. There's no way that you can pay to get there. That's something that you earn from what you stand for and sort of what you're doing as a brand. So, one of the things that really comes to mind, and this was a recent example, is the collaboration that we launched with Chipotle. It was something, so this was, we lit a fire. This was in March of this year. It sold out, the entire collection sold out. It was a 3-piece collection. It sold out in 3 days. It completely, it literally broke the internet. It was one of those things that, and what I loved about seeing that is what we did was we brought together two brands that both had galvanized Gen Z and had that cult status and following with Gen Z. Two brands that were digital disruptors, two brands that had the same values, and then had figured out how to crack TikTok. And that was sort of the original impetus or that was, I would say, the original impetus in terms of why we wanted to bring these two brands together. And then from there, I think it was really leaning into the insights of the community to figure out how we come up with something that has that unbridled creativity, but it is also rooted in insight. So one of the hero offerings within this collection was an eyeshadow palette. And that eyeshadow palette really was tapping into anyone who goes to Chipotle and they immediately know what that service tray looks like. That's what we wanted to take and sort of transform this into what's going to make sense for makeup. So, when I think about things that have really wowed me, there's so many things that I see even inside of our organization, but I think the common thread there is just this ability and willingness to transcend beauty. Outside of e.l.f., there are so many examples. I do continue to look at TikTok as a source of inspiration. And one of the, I would say one of the campaigns that I saw where it really was something that impressed me out the gate was something that they had launched last year, which was a Ratatouille musical leaning into content creators on TikTok. And for me, I looked at this and I'm just like, they've nailed it, because they have, however many billions of people who are using the platform, where there's just a limitless amount of creativity that exists. And they figured out how to actually harness that and turn that into something that no one could have ever imagined. And so that idea of, leaning into the superpowers that you have as a brand and then take that and convert that into something that no one could have ever imagined, to me, that is like the absolute standard in terms of, continuing to market with disruption and market with innovation.
Yeah, and that kind of goes in with what the partnership you guys have with Chipotle. I remember it was at the roundtable we were doing at the summit with you and
Candace.
Yes, Candace. And you guys were talking about it, and I'm like, what? And because it's like you never would put together makeup and Chipotle, so it's just
Absolutely.
I think it's taking that, something that's not really a norm, what the unexpected, and making it work. And that's really what it sounds like you're talking about. So yes, e.l.f. is a good example as well. I agree. So is there, how about, is there a guilty pleasure you have? Is there something that, you just love to, maybe you even kind of just do it on your own, or when you want to watch some TV or some downtime? What do you do?
My guilty pleasures. So one of them is eating chocolate covered blueberries. Like I cannot get enough of them. They're amazing. And so that's something that I actually discovered this at Trader Joe's years ago, and it's almost an addiction. So chocolate covered blueberries would be
darker milk chocolate.
Dark, definitely dark. That's also been an evolution within my own. I used to love milk chocolate, and now I've completely swung to the other end of the pendulum. And so anything with dark chocolate has really become an addiction. The other one is I think about my one of the things that what are these sort of rituals that I have on the weekends? And one of them has become, over the last sort of many years, just reading. So I get the New York Times on Sundays and reading the Modern Love column, and then reading the Social Cues column. Those are the two things that I will always prioritize on the weekends. And it's just one of those things that I think feeds me a lot, and just something that I always enjoy doing and reading.
Oh, cool. So that sounds great. And now my last question, which I like to ask, sort of, what is your plan B? If you could not be a marketer, e.l.f., you could not be at e.l.f., they just banned you. What would you do?
I think when I think about that, where my mind goes, and it's more sort of on themes. I think it would be something about creating something that still is very much centered on community building. There's this aspect of building and creating communities that really energizes me. So I don't know exactly what that would be, but I think there could be something in that space. There could also be something around the wellness space. So when I think back even to what inspires me about my dad, and sort of even the things that I personally have sort of built, whether it's yoga, or recently this year I started Taekwondo. And I think there's a lot in terms of breath and energy and movement, and sort of using that also as a way to sort of show up even as a leader with sort of clarity and agility and calmness. And so I think for me, it could be something either in the community building space, or it could also be something within wellness. So those would be the two areas that jump to mind.
Cool, very cool. Taekwondo, that's I actually did karate.
It's
very long time ago, but Taekwondo is more the kicking, right? Is that right, or am I wrong?
It is. Yeah, no, it is. And it's a martial art. So and I'm very much in the beginning stages of this. I was promoted from a white belt to a yellow belt, just to give
Uh-huh.
you a sense of how low I am on this totem pole. But what I enjoy about it is, one, it just puts your mind on something completely different. And I think there's, when you step into the room and you're starting it, it's really about just staying present on just that. And so I think there's that aspect that I like. I also like the aspect of it being sort of a martial art form. So I think it is something that I'm going to continue to commit to.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Gayatri. This has been awesome. I'm really glad. As I said, I love to get to know you guys on this side of it. I hear all about the strategies, but it's nice to hear the personal side and what brought you to where you are today. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I just
No,
want
Lisa,
to
this is a pleasure. Thank you.